So here's some radical candor about radical candor. Radical candor works. It works really well, but it works best for white men. Anyone who is underrepresented has more struggles with radical candor.
Thank you so much for speaking with us, Kim. I really appreciate it. I know right now that the wildfires in your area are still burning. So first, I would just like to know how you and your family are doing.
Oh, thank you. We are doing okay, even though it's terrible outside and we're half a mile away from an evacuation zone. So hard times here in California. A reminder that we need to take care of our environment.
So speaking of your work, you wrote Radical Candor and published it in 2017, and it's been a bestseller ever since. Why do you think the theme of the book is still so relevant today?
I think that a lot of people have in their mind this false dichotomy between being either somebody who's really effective and a total jerk or someone who's really ineffective but really nice. We don't have to choose. That's a false dichotomy. And so I think that is a big part of what has helped. I helped sort of the idea catch on. I also think that so many of us are told from the time that we learn to speak, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And now all of a sudden it's your job to say it. And that is really hard. It's really hard to undo training that's been pounded into your head since you learned to speak. We were told, be professional. And I think for an awful lot of us, that gets translated to mean leave your emotions, leave your true identity, leave your humanity, leave everything that's best about you at home and show up at work like some kind of robot. And that's not good either. And I think realizing that we can care and that we can be honest with one another at the same time is a big relief for a lot of people.
One of the core tenets of this book is the idea of caring personally but challenging directly. So I'm curious, while most of us are leading virtually and holding all of our meetings, individual or teams virtually, is that more difficult to do or just as challenging as before?
For me, it's much more difficult when I'm not in person because something like 85% of communication is nonverbal. However, I will say I've learned a few things during COVID. One of the things I really stressed in the book is the importance of in-person communication. But I think you can get actually a lot of the way there by talking over video. There's a reason why we're looking at each other as we're recording and not just recording audio. You get so much of that nonverbal communication and you get feedback when you talk live. So I think being really conscious of when you're having a synchronous conversation over video and when you can email stuff out is really important. The other thing that I have learned is that even though I have taken sort of a productivity hit working at home, I think that I have gotten a parenting gain, a Kim time gain, and a spousal gain because I'm more time with the people with my family.
Do you think that after COVID is over, there will be permanent changes in work habits? People will end up working more over video?
Basically, all of the CEOs who I coach right now have said that they have either gotten out of their leases or are working out of getting out of their leases, that they are going to make a big shift to virtual work. I mean, of course, there are times when we really do need to get together in person. But I think that a lot of people have been quite surprised at how effective people can be when they are working from home.
So I'd love to talk about your next book, Just Work, which is coming out in March 2021. First of all, what inspired you to write this book?
One of the things that I realized is that I needed to go much deeper into how we can be radically candid when bias or prejudice or bullying enter the equation, and also how we can be radically candid when those three sort of root causes of workplace injustice manifest as discrimination, harassment, or even physical violations. So one of the things I wanted to do in this book is to take a look at the different roles that we all play. So sometimes I was the person harmed by these attitudes and behaviors. Other times I was hopefully the upstander, but sometimes, unfortunately, just the bystander. I wanted in the book to have great compassion for all of us when we play all of those roles, because at different times and at different moments, we do play all of the roles.
I think about the 4 quadrants in Radical Candor that you use to describe behavior and interactions in a workplace: compassionate candor, ruinous empathy, obnoxious aggression, and manipulative insincerity. What is the equivalent illustration that you have drawn up for Just Work?
So in Just Work, we have bias, and we have bias, prejudice, and bullying. And with bias, you respond with an I statement. With bullying, you respond with a you statement where you're pushing someone away. And with prejudice, you can respond with an it statement. So to me, that is the most helpful thing in Just Work. But sometimes that gets too complicated, and people would rather have a 2x2. So here's the thing: in order to get to Just Work, we want to focus on collaboration rather than coercion. And we want to focus on respecting people's individuality rather than demanding conformity. And so Just Work is where you collaborate and you respect each person's individuality, where you get the best out of our collective efforts and also our efforts as individuals. Sometimes what happens is we do focus on collaboration, but we forget to respect individuality. Without even realizing it, often we sort of expect everyone to look like we do, and we wind up with a homogeneous organization. And that I call oblivious exclusion. And that is probably the most common workplace problem that I have seen. But there are other times when we both create a culture sort of where there's a dominance hierarchy that is focused on coercion, and where we demand conformity of every individual. And that I call brutal ineffectiveness, right? Because it is brutal and it doesn't work very well. And then there's also what I call self-righteous shaming. And this is what happens in too many organizations, where we try to coerce people into seeing things our way, into respecting others. You cannot coerce people into respecting others. Radical candor is what happens when you care personally and you challenge directly at the same time. But there are also times when we do challenge directly, but we forget to show that we care personally. And that I call obnoxious aggression. I used to call that the asshole quadrant because it seemed more radically candid. But I stopped doing that. And I stopped doing that for a very important reason. When I did that, people would use the radical candor framework to sort of write names in boxes. And I beg of you, don't use it that way. Very often when we realize we've landed in obnoxious aggression, our instinct, rather than to move up on the care personally dimension, to go in the right direction there, our instinct is to move in the wrong direction on challenge directly and to utter the false apology. And then we wind up in manipulative insincerity, sort of the worst place of all. And this is where passive aggressive behavior, political behavior, all the worst kinds of toxic workplace behaviors creep in, backstabbing behavior. But the most common mistake happens in this last quadrant, where you do show that you care personally, but you forget to challenge directly. You don't challenge directly, in fact, because you're afraid you're going to hurt someone's feelings, or you are going to upset them. And that I call ruinous empathy. Ruinous empathy sort of paralyzes us, whereas radical candor is what moves us forward, or compassionate candor. The final thing I would say is one of the most common mistakes that people make with radical candor is they use it as an excuse to act like a jerk. In the spirit of radical candor, and then the person will say something really mean. That is not the spirit of radical candor. That is the spirit of obnoxious aggression. So that's why I offer the term compassionate candor instead of radical candor.